In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the MoGraph MoSpline object and a SweepNurbs object to create an abstract organic growing shape like you see in this animation. This was thrown together fairly quickly. I assure you that you can actually get some fairly beautiful results with this. But this is really just a demonstration of how these tools work. First, let's take a look at the scene that I've created. I've got a sky object with this orange and yellow color on it. I've got a blue reflective material on my SweepNurbs. I've got a SweepNurbs which is giving this object 3D shape. Inside of that, I've got a MoSpline object which is creating these curves, and I'm animating the properties of my MoSpline over time in order to create this growing animation. In addition, I've created a camera, and I'm animating the position of that camera by using a null object. We may or may not get into that last part. So to recreate this, or something similar to it, create a new scene in Cinema 4D, and then go to MoGraph, MoSpline. The MoSpline object creates an organic spline based on some simple rules. The MoSpline right here has some options in the Simple tab, which I want you to go to. One, you can control the length of the spline, which you can see is happening with the change in this white line right here. The length. The number of steps here is the number of subdivisions along the way. You can't really see it if you zoom in, but it'll make more sense once you see the changes here. See what happens when you adjust the heading here. What's happening is our spline is rotating around. If you increase the number of segments, that increases the number of these lines that shoot out. So try something like 12. And see what happens now as you adjust angle H. You get something like this. Now for a nice circle, maybe we can get away with 26, something like that. Feel free to play with those numbers, of course. Heading, again, fans it out along heading. Pitch, fans it up and around along pitch. And bank, you're not going to see too much right now because it's twisting it. But if you were to add in, if you were to change the shape of this curve, the bank would be more visible. Next is this curve option, which will bend your shape into a circle against the y-axis, bend around the x-axis, it's a pitch movement, and twist is, again, bank, and that changes the shape of your curves. Width here, of course, adjusts the width of your curves. Now to give this a little bit of depth, we're going to use a SweepNurbs object. So add a SweepNurbs object to your scene by pressing and holding on HyperNurbs and choosing SweepNurbs. You can tell this is what we want because it's got a pipe, and this sort of looks like a pipe, so it's a good clue. Drag your MoSpline into your SweepNurbs object, and then also create a circle spline and drag that into your SweepNurbs object as well. You can see that the MoSpline has changed the width of our circle to match the width setting in our MoSpline here, which is nice, but I want to have a little bit more fine control, so I'm going to change some options in my SweepNurbs object. So click on SweepNurbs and turn off the Use Rail Scale setting. What it's going to do is use the actual size of our circle. So if you adjust the radius of the circle by clicking on the circle and adjusting radius to something like 10, you got a little bit of a better shot at this. Next, if you go to your SweepNurbs object, you can adjust the detail settings here, and you see this spline here for scale. That represents the size of our circle over the length of our spline. So if I was to drag this point on the far right down, you can see that we get very fine point. If I was to reverse these, we'd start at a fine point and get large towards the end. If you want to have it start small and get larger and then end small again, you can create a curve that looks something like this. Feel free to play around with this and create any shape that you want. I've got something that looks a bit like a baseball bat right now. Next up, let's just animate the settings for our MoSpline. I'm going to start by zeroing out my length as well as my curve, bend, and twist settings. And then I'm going to keyframe those. So on frame 0, hold down Control, click on length, H, P, and B, as well as curve, bend, and twist. Then at frame 90, let's increase our length to something more sizable, like say 500. Keyframe that. Increase angle H to really fan it out. Keyframe that by holding down Control and clicking. And then let's just see what happens if we bend this in. You can get kind of a sphere like this. And if we curve it, make it this cool half bowl shape. Let's see what happens if we twist it. Yeah, just create a shape that you like and hold down Control to add keys. So now when I press play, I get something that looks like this. Now you see all this blue muck around our object? That's a preview option in the MoSpline, which I'm finding a little distracting. So if you just bring the width down, you'll no longer see that. So we get something that looks like this. Nice, cool, growing organic shape. And let's just give this a bit of texture for visual interest. First up, let's put it on an interesting, or a slightly more interesting background. Add a sky object to your scene. And now we're going to create a couple of materials. One is going to be a gradient for the background. So just create a new material. And in the color channel, we're going to load in a gradient. You can do that by clicking on this triangle and choose gradient. We get a gradient that goes left to right, or U. If we change the type from 2DU to 2DV, we get a nice vertical gradient. And you can select any two colors that you want right here. I'm going to choose, let's go with some sky colors. So I'm going to go with a light blue at the base to a darker blue at the top, as you might see in an evening sky. And that looks fine. I'm going to now drag that onto my sky object and render. Get something that looks like this. Next, I'm going to add a bit of reflectivity to my sweep NURBS object. So create a new material. I'm going to give it a complementary color to blue, which is sort of a yellowy gold, something like that. And then I'm going to turn on reflection by clicking on the reflection tab, clicking on this check mark. And I want it to be less reflective in the center than the edges, so I'm going to add a Fresnel effect. So click on that triangle and choose Fresnel. Then just drag that onto your sweep NURBS object and press render. You get something that looks like this. Now if you choose a more interesting camera angle, if you go super wide angle, you get a really fun abstract shape, and I'm sure if you were to render this out, it would look pretty nifty. You'd impress all your friends. Okay, that is the basics of the MoSpline object. You might want to just play around with some of those settings and see what other shapes you can create. In addition, you might want to change the mode. If you've got a later version of Cinema 4D, there's something called Turtle Mode, which you might want to investigate. And you get more information on that by right-clicking on your help here, or excuse me, on an item, and choosing Show Help. And you'll get a full description of all of these tools.